Welcome everyone to the December 10th, 2014 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Brentwood. If you all join me with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Clint Lewis.
Here.
Rich Obertino.
Here.
Terry Knowles.
Here.
John Nurnberg is here. Sherry Bilderbeck.
Here.
Michael Daming.
Here.
Dan Glowski.
Here.
Jennifer Hansen.
Here.
David Dimmitt.
Here.
David Plefka.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nurnberger. First item on the agenda is the approval of the November 12th, 2014 meeting minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those minutes? Are there any proposed revisions? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved by acclamation. We have no matters under new business, but 5 under old business tonight. So we'll go through each of those. First item under old business is a petition for site plan approval submitted by CEDC on behalf of Millman Lumber for the property at 3021 South Brentwood Boulevard. Is the petitioner here?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Mike Bork with Civil Engineering Design Consultants here this evening on behalf of Millman Lumber. As the Chairman mentioned, we're requesting site plan approval for the construction of 2 canopies at 3021 South Brentwood. We were in front of you last month, and then at your recommendation, we met with the site plan subcommittee meeting to address a couple of concerns. And at that meeting on November 26th, we were given unanimous approval based upon the addition of the planters along South Brentwood and then the incorporation of hardy board siding on the east ends of the canopies.
I think all of that's accurate. This petitioner was before us the last general meeting, and the subcommittee did review its application in detail. Please recall that the Commission had concerns about the easternmost part of these canopies as well as the landscaping, and they addressed both of those concerns, so the subcommittee did unanimously recommend approval of its application. So with that being said, are there any questions for this applicant? Mr. Glowski.
Yeah, is this a picture of the planter boxes that?
Yes, sir.
Any other commissioners have a question for Mr. Rourke? Okay. Is there any member of the audience who would like to address the commission on this petition? Okay, if there's no further discussion, the chair will entertain a motion. Ms. Bilderbeck.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval of this application as currently submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Clint Lewis.
Yes.
Rich Obertino.
Yes.
Terry Knowles.
Yes.
John Nurnberg is yes. Sherry Bilderbeck.
Yes.
Dan Glowski.
Yes.
Jennifer Hansen.
Yes.
David Dimmitt.
Yes.
David Plefka.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and Mr. Rourke, thank you for your accommodation throughout this process.
Thank
Mr.
you, Mr.
Wise, what's
Chairman.
the next step for this petitioner?
The application will be on the December 15th Board of Aldermen agenda.
Very good, thank you. Next item under old business is a petition for a conditional use permit and site plan approval for a new drive-through fast food restaurant at 8590 Eager Road. Petitioner being Chick-fil-A Incorporated. Is the petitioner or his representative here? Is that Ms. Stedman?
Yes. Yes, my name is Kelly Stedman. I'm with Wolford Engineering, and we're here representing Chick-fil-A, who is also in attendance tonight for any additional questions.
Very good. And Ms. Stedman, the commission, you'll recall that this application has been before the commission now. I believe this is the 3rd general meeting at which it has been before you, and it's also been the subject of 2 different subcommittee agendas. So, and we appreciate, Ms. Stedman, I appreciate your professionalism and your accommodation throughout this process. But if you could review, I don't think that you, at the last time that you were before us, you had not finalized the, in terms of the implications on traffic. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the configuration of the building as it would apply to traffic. Is that right?
Yes.
So, and is that the configuration of the building as it implicates traffic. Is that the only change that's been made to this application since our last general meeting?
Yes, the only change that's been made were the requests in the traffic study have been met, and the parking was adjusted based on that, and the building had been shifted and the drive-through shifted as part of those requests.
Okay, why don't you just briefly, and there were some commissioners that were not at the last subcommittee meeting, if you could brief the commission on the changes that have been made to the application since our last, the November meeting, when we all got together in these chambers.
Okay, so the changes that have been made to the plan, and in the traffic study, there was 2 options, acceptable options provided. And we met all of the options provided in number 1 and most of them 2. What it had requested was that the building shift back further away from the main drive, which also then could allow the drive-through to be shifted back and better traffic flow at the intersection for cars coming out of the drive-through and entering the intersection in the development. Another recommendation in that traffic study was to lengthen the throat of the entrance drive to the Chick-fil-A, and which eliminated some parking. The subcommittee had requested for 5 spaces to be eliminated, which was what was shown in option 2, and that basically aligned the throat on both sides. Going back to Chick-fil-A, the parking is very important for their parking numbers, and those spots are also very close to the front door. So what we've proposed now is to eliminate 3 spaces, 2 of which are on the side near the entrance drive, which is the more critical maneuvering side for cars to back in and out, 1 of which is on the left-hand side when you drive into the entrance.
Okay, very good. Mr. Cannon, can you please step forward? So, commissioners, you'll recall that the vast majority of the conversation that's taken place at the subcommittee in particular has been on traffic and safety, congestion, and all of the issues stemming from the proposed configuration of the building. And Ms. Stedman spent most of her presentation this evening on that, as you heard. Mr. Cannon, but since the last time, I don't believe that we had discussed at the last November meeting, Mr. Cannon, and I'd like to have him introduce himself, his report that he put together. So, Mr. Cannon, if you could introduce yourself and just briefly outline CBB's report on this application.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. My name's Lee Cannon. I'm a traffic engineer principal with Crawford Bunty Braemeier, CBB, here in St. Louis. We were asked by the city, and just so you know, we are the third-party traffic engineers for the city, so we did our work through Planning and Public Works. We were asked to complete a traffic review for the proposed restaurant, which, as you know, is going on the Macaroni Grill site at Deerberg's Brentwood Point. And our purpose was to identify the potential concerns and make recommendations regarding access and layout to optimize the efficiency and safety of traffic flow. So making recommendations, if you will. The Deerberg's Brentwood Point site is a mature commercial center that already has its traffic base and patterns pretty well established, and this site for the Chick-fil-A would replace an existing restaurant. Typically, what we find is that a supermarket has its highest number of transactions, not necessarily dollar sales, but during the midday, the lunchtime on a weekday. And what happens is people are going and getting grab-and-go foods and running out and running an errand. So there's a lot of activity. And we found that there were about 590 cars, about 600 vehicles that move through that first internal intersection coming in off of Eager Road. And we know from past experience that Chick-fil-A is a very successful business. And based on our previous work with Chick-fil-A's in the region, we see them nearly, not quite, but nearly doubling the traffic flow through that first internal intersection. And that intersection has the capacity, the ability to handle that traffic. But we made some minor recommendations for improvement at the access driveway that goes into the outlot, and some other recommendations that were intended to improve the flow around that area. We do not anticipate that this user will have any traffic impacts 500 feet away from their driveway within the Deerberg site. And we don't anticipate, as long as the improvements are made as the applicant has indicated that they would be, that there would be really any noticeable change on Eager Road. But we're really focused on that area at that first internal intersection within the site south of Eager Road. We also looked at the pedestrian issues, ADA accessibility, connecting of pathways and things like that are a little bit more current design than would have been in place at the time that the site was originally developed. It's our understanding that the applicant has put in those improvements as recommended so that the pedestrian connections can be made, and there's ramps instead of stairs, or ramps in addition to stairs, and those types of things as well. We had looked at the parking. We believe that the parking on the site is sufficient at plus or minus 70 spaces where they wound up. However, what we recommended was that there would be a shared parking agreement in place between the Chick-fil-A and the owner, so that during peak times, if they found it to be an issue, that the employees could be parked, on the empty side of the Deerberg's lot, maybe the northeast corner or somewhere where they've identified open opportunities. And it's our understanding that they did indeed come to an agreement about that parking, and you can ask the applicant about that, the details. So what we did effectively with options 1 and 2 were to make the ability, and I don't have an ability to put a graphic up right now, but as you come in from Eager Road and you travel southbound, you have to make basically a U-turn to the right to turn into the site. And we've made the width of pavement available to you to make that U-turn wider than it was, or than it currently is. And so that vehicle turning in does not have to cross the lane line in the driveway and potentially conflict with an outbound motorist from the Chick-fil-A. So with that, I believe that generally speaking, the applicant has met the spirit or the intent of the recommendations. They haven't matched the recommendations, but again, it was recommendations for consideration. And they also have to be aware that you have to balance the amount of parking you provide with the amount of circulation and travel ways. So I believe that it's an acceptable balance as they have revised their plan.
So from a safety, congestion, traffic perspective, you are satisfied as the city's traffic engineer with the site plan as submitted?
I am satisfied.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Cannon. We'll open the floor up to questions of either the applicant or Mr. Cannon from the commission. Mr. Plofka.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cannon, I have a question for you. So as I understand it, as people who would patronize the Chick-fil-A's drive-through and would be exiting from the lane that's been created, they would come across 2 stop signs within about, looks like about 40 feet of each other. Is that correct? Coming east.
Right. Today, there's no control there, and as part of our recommendations, we had recommended some striping and some signing, and so that is correct.
Okay, so in addition to that, so traffic coming to the east would be regulated by 2 stop signs in that proximity to one another. Traffic coming from the south to the north, hoping to exit this first entrance into from Deerberg's or wherever, as I understand it, as they leave the parking field, there will be stop signs on at least on the lanes that are directly lined up with the entrance exit out of this parking lot.
So I don't have the plan in front of me, and I do not believe that there is a stop sign in that parking aisle at this time.
But the understanding is that there's going to be. Is that the implication, or that
there's not a requirement? I mean, as far as a traffic engineer, this is a parking lot, right?
There is signs.
Oh, they're being added?
No, they're already there.
Okay, so let's just assume for purposes of my question, because I haven't even really gotten my question yet. I'm trying to set it up here.
Okay.
And so coming from the east to the west, the traffic in the parking lot is regulated by a stop sign before turning left into this same exit
I
area.
believe that is correct, yes.
But traffic coming from the north to the south is not regulated in any way. In fact, there's a sign that says incoming traffic does not stop, correct?
That is also correct.
And if we expect the volume of traffic to be around 1,000 cars an hour at peak times, 500 of those, just by the law of averages, are coming in as 500 are going out, what implication is that going to have on the other 3 stopped sides to this quote-unquote intersection here, where 3 sides are stopped, 1 is stopped twice within 40 feet, and there is going to be, I would imagine, a queue of cars behind that would have to wait back up all the way into the queue for the drive-through. And have we talked about or have we discussed the implication of whether or not this is going to cause backups into their drive-through lane and then backups into their parking lot and then perhaps backups coming all the way into the drive-through lane in the first place?
Okay. Well, let me start at capacity. This intersection, this first internal intersection, one of the reasons that we initially had concerns is because it's effectively it's a 5-legged intersection,
right?
Which, you know, you have this adjacent intersection next to the one already. But that's in a parking lot. It's not the same as we had a 6-legged intersection on Eager. That would be very much more difficult to deal with. 600 cars an hour is not a whole lot of traffic, and even going up to 1,100 cars an hour is not a whole lot of traffic. I mean, especially because this road was built with 2 inbound lanes.
If my math is right, it's a car every 3 seconds, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so a car every 3 seconds that's not having to stop.
Well, again,
is going to put pressure on the places the people that have to stop, I would imagine, because
the 250 cars that Chick-fil-A may add, though
each way.
Yes, for the inbound 250,
okay,
those are primarily just going to be right turn, a right turn U movement. So they really won't delay or negatively affect anybody else through the intersection.
Assuming that they use their turn signal, because that lane that's designated for them to make that right-hand turn is a lane that will also give them the option of going straight ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's that assumption. Now,
the people that get added over on the drive-through exit lane and coming back out of the Chick-fil-A, those 250 people, those people will be delayed in trying to turn left back out towards Eager. They'll also add conflicts to the other people that are stopped, the ones from the east towards the west, the ones from the south towards the north. There's going to be twice as much traffic through that intersection. There'll be more congestion, but it won't be unsafe, and it won't exceed the capacity of the intersection. And it will take you more time to drive through it.
And in your estimation, it's not going to result in a backup of traffic actually all the way into the drive-through lane that's being proposed here?
Well, I don't believe that it will cause any congestion up the driveway for the center into Eager Road. To me, it's somewhat irrelevant if it creates congestion and queuing and it puts Chick-fil-A customers backed up onto Chick-fil-A's site, because there they sit on Chick-fil-A's site. They don't create a problem. Now, if we went to the point where there wasn't enough capacity and there were congestion issues to a level where it became a problem, then I would worry that those people would get aggravated and impatient and start doing unsafe things. I do not believe that that is going to be the case.
So waiting in a queue in the drive-through lane isn't as aggravating as waiting to come into the place in the first place?
Well, I don't believe that it's going to be to a level where it will get aggravating.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that your analysis of the capacity sort of stopped at the edge of their property? I mean, your analysis of the capacity had to do with the capacity of the parking lot to handle the volume, not so much their individual private parking to deal with the volume as well.
And again, I'm looking for safety and efficiency, because this is a private parking lot. I would have scrutinized and much more if we'd have been talking about the driveway on Eager Road, because those would have been public traffics.
Sure.
So we're talking about, do I believe that they provided enough, a good enough design so that they don't create safety hazards and create problems that are going to spill back on a public road system? If they create enough traffic that they've got a traffic problem on their site, they're going to be very pleased.
So
Because they're going to have a lot of customers.
So if I understand the impetus of what you just said, you're not as concerned, I mean, because that's not your mandate here, you're not as concerned about backups that would impact the private lot as much as you might be, or if at all,
Right.
related to how it's going to impact the public area.
Right, and again, some of that has to do with the physical characteristics. People on Eager Road are generally traveling 30 to 40 miles an hour.
Sure.
People going through the Chick-fil-A parking lot are probably going 12. You know, so
Perhaps even
if
less.
people run into each other, we're not going to be talking about death, and we're not going to be talking about disability injuries. We're going to be talking about fender benders. So again, it's that level of concern because of the speeds. You can't get going that fast when you back out of a parking lot. Well, you can if you try, but most people don't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Neuenberger?
I had a question about the lease agreement for the parking spaces from Deerbergs. Who has gone to control all that? They have all kinds of employee areas. Who's going to make sure they're parked there? Is it going to be Deerbergs making sure they do it, or is it going to be Chick-fil-A managing themselves, or how's that going to work? Because we've had experience where Target was going to have 60 spaces for employee parking on one side and never use it, and in the future. So I'm just trying to understand how that agreement is going to work and who's going to monitor it.
Chick-fil-A would have to implement it and manage it. However, Deerbergs would also follow through with it because it's in their interest and it's their agreement with Chick-fil-A that they follow through with the details put into the agreement that they've signed with them.
Okay, and then is that agreement been signed already?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, please step forward and introduce yourself, sir.
Brent Boymer with Deerberg Markets. To answer your question directly, two things. One, to say the agreement has been signed, it's in the body of the lease agreement that we have with them. Mm-hmm. The lease is fully negotiated and is literally waiting for signature on our end tomorrow. Because of the transaction that Chick-fil-A is doing, there's a closing involving the current occupant, Macaroni Grill. I don't anticipate the actual closing of the lease, everybody to sign for another 2 weeks or so. But and to answer your question about how we will maintain or control that, what we are doing, and I apologize because I can't point to it. I can show you if you don't mind. I'll walk up here. This isn't the full site plan. Over here, across the street where the Office Depot space is located, we have designated spots. That's perfect.
Probably need to be on.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and
Yeah.
do what we don't have
Does
to do.
everybody have this exhibit?
It's in the package.
Okay. You can see that we have designated, and it's little X's. The employee parking during evening and all times is at the rear and the side of the building that contains Office Max and Petco. And the way, to answer your question, how do we ensure that that's followed? The lease agreement has a requirement in there that if we have problems, that they have to give us license plate information for all of their employees, and that therefore we'd have the ability to go and check the information that we have received from them versus what is parked in those areas. So that's
That's part of this because you're worried about their employees parking like by Beauty Brands or one of the other locations that you have lease obligations
from our
with.
perspective, we would like them to be self-parked on an outlot, which I think is consistent with what Brentwood's code is. But we understand also that, if there is issues and they have overflow parking, that obviously they'll want to take care of their customers so their employees can park off of their lot. And we've identified spots candidly that they're not used. They're just really at this point, due to the nature of Office Depot's business, that spaces that are available and that could be used for employee parking.
Okay, that's all I had, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other commissioner? Okay, we'll open it up to the audience. Would any member of the audience like to address the commission? Mayor Kelly?
How are you? First of all, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and thank you again for your dedication and support for the city of Brentwood. Greatly appreciate everything you do for Brentwood. I'm here tonight to voice my support for Chick-fil-A. I think that there has been my feeling is that the traffic will work. The traffic engineer says that it will work. I think some of the comments have been at some of the site plan review meetings that, well, it could be better. Well, it could always be better. And we're dealing, again, now, 12, 15 years later, with redevelopment on an existing site. And I think one of the things that is keep in mind is that from Brentwood's perspective, if I put on my economic development hat, we've always strived to bring the best businesses to our community. I think this is a great opportunity for the city of Brentwood. This is a good location for a fast food restaurant. It complements the stores that are already there within the center, where when we talk about traffic counts, we're also going to talk about the people that are at that center already there, who are then are going to utilize this restaurant. The people that go to Dearborg's for lunch or go to Dearborg's to pick something up at lunch, or to pick up their cleaners, or to go to the eye doctor. Those types of uses will use that type of restaurant on this outlet, whereas they wouldn't necessarily use a sit-down restaurant like Macaroni Grill. That is then kind of isolated as a sit-down type restaurant, not surrounded by the businesses that support it. The comparison was used with, well, we got this great restaurant down at the corner of Eager and Brentwood now, which is awesome, and it works well at that center. But they have a captive audience of a hotel there as well, and their main business is dinner and lunch. So I think it's a complementary use for the center. It's in a good location in the center between two blocks. And I think the applicant, I also want to stress that when we were talking about parking spaces initially with the traffic study, the reason that parking spaces were being talked about was not because to eliminate the parking spaces from driving in and out of the parking space perspective. It was really because of the turning radius coming and making that U-turn into the lot. The traffic engineers, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, was that without redesigning it, if they came in, they'd be turning into the exit lane. Well, in order to accommodate that, and initially without eliminating any of the parking spaces, Chick-fil-A, instead of eliminating the parking spaces, they went a step beyond and actually shifted the building so that they could make that turning radius wider and make that turn safer. The other thing to keep in mind with the exiting of the traffic that one of the members brought up today from the drive-through window or drive-through lanes, that traffic is in a sense regulated. If you look at their statistics on their drive-up windows, each customer takes about 45 seconds. So even if you have two exiting because of the two windows, you'd have a car about every 20 to 25 seconds exiting, which would be, again, helping with that flow of traffic as they're exiting the site. Again, I think it's important to remember we really have strived to have some, I'd hate to lose a business because it's successful. And I think it would be better to have Chick-fil-A there and have a heavy volume of traffic, which the center is designed for. The intersection at Eager and the entrance and exit out of that site were designed for this type of traffic, than to have a Jack in the Box just because Jack in the Box is going to generate less traffic. The other thing is, I think this is something I personally, as long as I've been elected official, have never had as many phone calls asking when something is coming to the city of Brentwood, except for when we announced that Trader Joe's was coming to Brentwood. This is something I think that the general public really sees as a benefit to our community, and something I think that will be used by not only the people traveling through our community, but our community as a whole as well. So I think it's a good development. I hope we don't penalize them for their success. It's something we've strived to do in the city of Brentwood, is bring those good businesses here, and this is an opportunity to do that as well. With that, kind of on a side note, I'll pass this out. You can look at that as this is going to be kind of on the humorous side, something I just thought of. I was going to tell you that I got this email in the mail today, but I just thought it was a way of supporting and ending my support for Chick-fil-A with a little humor. So, again, I really do appreciate everything you do for the city of Brentwood. I really do think this would be a great addition to our community, and I hope you all will support it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Any other member of the, yes, please.
I just want to speak briefly on behalf of the owner of the shopping center. We are extremely concerned about traffic as well. We had our own traffic engineer look at the plan. The Dearberg family, trust me, if we thought there was going to be issue about getting people in and out of the shopping center, and obviously to our stores or any of the other tenants, we just simply wouldn't have gone forward with Chick-fil-A. I do commend them because in connection with what Mr. Cannon requested and candidly also some things that we made requests of them in terms of reconfiguring the location of the building and how the drive-through works, they've been responsive and have satisfied us that the traffic will work going in and out of that shopping center. I can also say that we also agree with their thought process with respect to the parking spaces. We can live as an owner of the balance of the center with them losing 3 more parking spots and there being the potential that customers would then perhaps, primarily we're talking what we call Building H, which is beauty brands. That's, there may be during peak time some additional customers parking there, but if we go to much more than 3, then in all honesty, then the parking becomes a challenge from our perspective in connection with owning the shopping center. The other thing that, and I'm sure you guys have heard this in one of their earlier presentations, I don't know of a better operator of a fast food restaurant. They're different than a lot of the fast food restaurants around in terms of it's a one owner, one operator setup. So the guy that owns the business is there on a daily basis. He's making sure that things are working well, that traffic is flowing well. To your question, that employees are parking where they're supposed to be parked. I mean, that's one reason, and I don't want to disparage other fast food operators, but you're not dealing with just, a manager where there might be an owner that owns 300 other franchises across the country. You're dealing with an owner-operator on site there, and we're confident that if there are issues by way of things that you addressed on employee parking, that we have a direct line there and that they can be resolved quickly.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anyone else from the audience? Okay, open it back up to the commission. Mr. Demmett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just follow up on something that the mayor had mentioned, Justin. The Jack in the Box example. If Chick-fil-A, if we should recommend to the Board of Aldermen that they should approve this application, and let's assume that they go in, and then 2 or 3 years down the road, they change their business model, and their business model results in them shutting down some Chick-fil-A's. And let's assume that the one up on Eager is one of them to get shut down. Since there already is a CUP in place for Chick-fil-A, would that have any effect on if Dearberg says, well, we've got a drive-through CUP in place here, let's market it out. Let's see if we can get somebody else to come on in there, like a Jack in the Box.
Under that scenario, it would have to come back through the board. Under our current standard conditional use permit, there is a provision that any change of ownership or tenant requires a new CUP to be issued.
If we would recommend approving this, it seems to me as though we'd have a hard time recommending to the Board of Aldermen that they deny the request of another applicant for a CUP, such as a Jack in the Box or White Castle or Burger King, if Chick-fil-A should go dark and they want to come on in there. If we saw fit to recommend approval of the CUP for Chick-fil-A, I don't know how, assuming that that applicant can meet all the 11 requirements of the CUP, I don't know how we could consistently say to them no.
Right, and I think that the point you made is spot on. If an applicant comes in, whether it's this applicant or another, and it meets the 11 requirements outlined in the code for a conditional use permit, then I believe the language is as strong in the code as the board shall approve it unless it does not meet one of these conditions. So whether it's this one or another one, I think that is absolutely the case.
And that kind of gets to one of my number of concerns that I have with this applicant, is that it's that old slippery slope again. If we allow this applicant, if we recommend approving this applicant, what does that mean 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road? Does that mean the Pearl Eye Vision store that's in place? Perhaps the Promenade decides they could make more money with a different tenant in there. If it was a fast food drive-through restaurant, and they decide, let's put one in there in boot out Pearl Eye Vision. They come in front of us on a conditional use permit. If we recommend approval of a CUP for Chick-fil-A just down the road on Eager, and again, assuming that applicant meets the 11 requirements, I don't know how we could recommend to the Board of Aldermen that they should deny that request for a CUP. I'm concerned that we're opening the door for fast food restaurants on Eager if we go ahead and approve this or recommend approving this. Now, back to the traffic issues. Maybe I misunderstood you, Ms. Stedman. I thought you said that you had incorporated all of the recommendations of CBB, and you might want to come up to the microphone there. You didn't say that you had recommended or that you had incorporated all the recommendations, correct?
I said we incorporated the recommendations in option 1 and most of the recommendations from option 2.
Well, doesn't option 1 include the recommendation to eliminate the spots that pertain to?
I said that backwards.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Option 2, all of option 2, most of option 1.
Okay.
It's
good.
typically
I just want some
labeled
clarification
differently.
because
Yeah.
What we talked about at length on that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and not to rehash it, but for those members who weren't here, we were discussing at length about that, the driveway throat, and how CBB's recommendation included eliminating 4 spots. And what we got in response from the applicant was they didn't eliminate those 4. In fact, what they did, they added a 5th spot, and which is not only inconsistent with the traffic engineer's recommendation, but I think it was one step further.
Actually, can I just speak real quick about
Certainly.
the 5th spot? It was actually a relocated spot that was displaced because of the drive-through shift. That was part of the recommendation. So
Okay.
there was no additional parking added between those two. It moved a space. So, but it's still
But in
correct
terms of the driveway throat, it made the throat even shorter.
at the last subcommittee meeting, yes.
Okay, thank you. So what we talked about on that Wednesday night was the elimination of the 5 spots. And what we got from the applicant, in the spirit of compromise, was an elimination of 3 of the 5. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Now, I'm left here, though, looking at this, when we have the traffic engineer who recommends eliminating 2 spots on the outbound lanes that the applicant has not eliminated for the driveway throat, it causes me some real pause.
Can I explain a little
Absolutely.
bit on the
Please
difference
do.
in what was eliminated and why?
Sure.
Well, the first option 2 that was met was also a recommendation of the traffic report, which was met with all the spaces still in place. So with option 1, the reasoning behind the spaces being eliminated, the spaces on the right-hand side are more critical because those are ones that are going to conflict with entering traffic. The throat has been lengthened by eliminating those 2 on the right to 40 feet. So you have a little more space for someone to make their maneuver to pull out of a space and get out, which was the concern at the subcommittee meeting. The space on the left isn't as big of a concern because if they're waiting for someone to get out of one of those spaces, they're waiting in their own parking lot at the same time. So Chick-fil-A feels that that's not as big of a concern of a conflict coming out of their driveway as the 2 on the right to satisfy the entering vehicles.
Okay.
In addition, those spots are closer to the front door, but again, it's outbound person that's pulling out and driving out of the space.
Thank you for that explanation. I understand that, and I appreciate what you're saying, that it's on private property, and Chick-fil-A is saying it doesn't matter. But it does matter to me that when, first of all, let's back up a little bit. option 2, it doesn't specifically say eliminate those 4 spots, but option 2 did recommend you could eliminate those 4 spots. Option 1 said you need to eliminate those 4 spots. Do you remember that from CBB's report?
I would have to look at the wording, but Lee, can you speak to
Well, if
that?
you turn to page 3 of 8 of the report, I'll read it to you. Option 2 simply reassigns the driveway width to favor the inbound movement. The first 2 parking stalls on both sides of the parking lot access line could also be eliminated on this plan to eliminate those conflicts in the driveway throat. So CBB discussed eliminating those spots on both sides in both of its options. But Chick-fil-A decided not to do that, correct?
They said you could, too. They didn't put it in as an exact recommendation, correct?
I'm not going to quibble with you over semantics, but you were at the meeting where Mr. Cannon said it would be preferable to eliminate those 5 spots. You remember him saying that?
I believe it was optimal, but yes.
I think the word was preferable.
Okay.
And again, you come to us and you haven't eliminated those 5. So consequently, what we're going to end up with are cars parked in those lots on the outbound lane and quite possibly not being able to get out because cars that are trying to exit are right behind them. And the only way that they'll be able to get out is, I think Mr. Cannon referred to it as a courtesy gap. Remember that?
Yes,
Okay.
typical in parking lots.
Well, it may be typical in parking lots. I'm not sure it's typical in a parking lot where you're looking at 240 cars in an hour period. Maybe it is. You know, I'm not an expert in that area by any means, but it seems to me that that's a bit of a burden for customers that are parked there. You're going to have cars exiting that are going to be in a line, and they're not going to be able to get out because of the short driveway throat, which is exactly what Mr. Cannon was getting to, why you needed to extend the driveway throat, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now,
But from a business standpoint, and Chick-fil-A too, they want their customers to be able to get out. They don't want frustrated customers. So the person waiting, as he said, there is a courtesy gap. You stop, you let someone pull back. It's a short time frame that they have to back out, especially because they're coming in the same lane, and then they will stack in the queue to leave the exit again.
and I don't doubt Chick-fil-A, the last thing they want are their customers not being able to get out. I get that. But you know, here's where my experience has brought me. When we have traffic studies done and the applicant, even when the applicant has incorporated all the recommendations, we still find that there might be some issues with traffic. And the classic example is Starbucks here on Brentwood Boulevard. Okay, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not. Take my word for it. It's a bit of an issue with queuing up down on northbound Brentwood Boulevard. Now that's one where the applicant did everything that the engineer suggested. Here, I'm looking at an applicant that's not taking into consideration and is not willing to do everything that the engineer is saying that should be done. So in terms of probability, my concern is that there's a greater probability we are going to have a lot of traffic congestion because the applicant hasn't done what the engineer has recommended. Okay, I don't expect you to, there's really no response to that, but that's my concern. That's what my experience has shown me. Now, traffic aside, the other problem that I have is just in general the change of this property from a restaurant to a drive-through. And I guess I'm going to direct my comments more to the commission. It was just 2 months ago when the mayor stood up at the opening of Bonefish Grill and said that the opening of this restaurant was the culmination of a 20-year project. And to essentially to improve the northern part of Brentwood. And if you look at Eager with Brentwood on the west, Hanley on the east, you recognize that there has been a substantial change to that whole area. And the question that pops in my mind is when that vision came about 20 years ago, I wasn't around. I lived in Brentwood, but I wasn't on P&Z, is whether or not this was included in that vision. A drive-through restaurant on Eager. Is that what the P&Z 20 years ago and the administration had envisioned? Is that what they were wanting to get? Drive-through restaurants on Eager? Because that's what we're faced with this applicant. I don't have anybody here in front of me who was on P&Z 20 years ago who could speak to that, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Great, I'll let you answer that question for me. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that was the vision, to have drive-through restaurants on Eager. But it seems to me, in my own opinion, and we have 11 members on this commission, is that a drive-through restaurant is a step back from what we have right now. It's unique what we have there, and I'd like to maintain that. I think that one of our responsibilities as a commission member is to be a trustee, and by that I mean somebody who, while we don't own the property, our responsibility is to protect the property in the city of Brentwood, maintain it for the benefit of others, basically caretakers. And so I look at that property and I think, are we really doing that? Are we satisfying our responsibility if we go ahead and approve or recommend approving this CUP for a drive-through restaurant? I don't know what kind of effect it's going to have, if it be a negligible or substantial effect, positive, negative, time will tell. But I'm very concerned that if we go ahead and approve this, that there are going to be some negative consequences, that we are going to end up, maybe not us, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the commission at that point is going to look back to December 10th, 2014 and say, that's where the mistake was made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Demmett. Other commissioners? Ms.
Couple of
Bilderbeck.
questions for Ms. Stedman.
Oh. Mr. Lewis, did you have?
Yeah.
Go ahead, proceed.
Did Chick-fil-A do their own traffic study on any of this?
No. We knew that the city was doing a traffic study, so it really made no point for us to do it, and Deerbergs did one of their own also.
And you folks are fine with the cars being released out of the drive-through?
Yes.
And plenty of timing through these stop signs?
Yes. Because again, the last thing they want are cars backed up in their drive-through, because then they can't meet the 45 seconds per car.
Yeah. And any stats on how many Chick-fil-A's closed in their first 10 years?
That's a good question. And I direct it to Jason Hill. He's with Chick-fil-A.
Hi, Jason Hill. I'm with Chick-fil-A, 5200 Buffington Road, Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you so much for your time and your diligence in this process. We really appreciate it. I know it's all in the best interest of the city as well as Chick-fil-A. To answer your question, I don't have stats on how many have closed within the first 10 years, but what I can tell you is that we've never closed a store outside of needing to do so for a right-of-way taking, a freestanding store. We have closed mall units that perhaps have been underperforming that have been replaced on the exterior with a freestanding unit. So we're in it for the long haul.
One more follow-up question. Were you looking to come to Brentwood, or was it the other way around?
I can tell you, and John Schuff with NAI Desco is our broker, and he's probably been looking in Brentwood before I even had started with Chick-fil-A, which was about 2.5 years ago. We've been looking in Brentwood for quite some time for that right opportunity that fits both for the prospective use as well as our desire to be at one of the, the high traffic corridors within the city. I don't know how long we've been looking in Brentwood, but I know it's been before my time at Chick-fil-A. So This is a good opportunity, not only for the city of Brentwood, but also for Chick-fil-A. And I would just also add to that, I don't necessarily think that approving a drive-through on Eager in this particular CUP opens up the door that demands you approve CUPs, throughout the corridor. I think you still can use your judgment in doing that. But I will say this, and Mr. Mayor alluded to this, we're not just any fast food restaurant. We don't just come in and plop down a flag and have a franchisee who owns 30 of them and just walk away and ignore what's going on at the store. We have one owner-operator who's there at that store probably every day. That owner-operator isn't just dedicated to making sure that the store is running appropriately. He's also interested, he or she is also interested in making sure that his or her staff grows in their positions, make sure that he looks out for their best interests, make sure that they act as leaders in their community, as well as that owner-operator does himself or herself act as a leader in the community by doing many things, just a few of which is being involved with the schools and being involved with the local churches, being involved with the local Chamber of Commerce. The impacts of Chick-fil-A in a positive nature extend well beyond just the business operation itself of selling chicken, which is what we do. So I'd just like you to consider that in your recommendation tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
My pleasure.
Mr. Obertino?
Thank you. You can have a seat. I have questions for you. I just want to follow up on a couple of comments made by the fellow commissioners and some of the concerns. One is the traffic. There's two options when we leave this drive-through. There was a concern about the stop signs being so close together, and if they become an issue, they turn right and they go south along the retail shops and disperse themselves to the parking lot and can leave on the western or the eastern exit of the shopping center. So they have two outs to get out of Deerberg's, which I think Deerberg's would probably like to have more cars going by the front door, and I know the retail shops would. And this lunchtime traffic that Mr. Cannon talked about, those retail shops are probably at their minimum occupant load during the lunchtime traffic, as opposed to the grocery stores. There's not as much traffic going into beauty brands and that sort of thing during those times. The concern about setting the precedents for the drive-throughs, we've set precedents on Hanley, we've set precedents on Manchester, and we've set precedents on Brentwood, and I haven't seen a rush of drive-throughs trying to come in after we've opened those restaurants on those arterial roads. So I don't think it, and I think we have the protection if somebody else wants to come in and take the I place that you talked about, we can set that standard on those buildings, and that's what the conditional use is there for. We can set a level that we feel comfortable with, and perhaps if you needed to prohibit somebody, you can make it, set the bar high enough to do that. The third is on the traffic, and I think Mr. Kennan said this evening that they've met the spirit of what they've been requested, and it's pretty uncommon that we follow exactly every parking stall that Lee recommends at one of these commissions. But the spirit's been met, and I don't think we should get down to one or two parking stalls and penalizing somebody because it's not exactly in one of his conceptual sketches that he put together. So overall, I think they've done a great job. I think this center is going to do well by having this use in it as opposed to a sit-down restaurant that is not doing very well. And I would rather see a nice, fully functioning restaurant there, whether it's a drive-through or not, but is bringing something to the community as opposed to a restaurant that's going dark and is not bringing any advantage to the community.
Thank you. Ms. Knowles?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with Mr. Obertino. In answer to Mr. Dimmitt's question, I can't speak to 20 years ago. It was the 1 year of my life that I didn't live in Brentwood. I can go 13 years back. And when I joined the commission, did I envision drive-through restaurants? I envisioned successful restaurants, successful businesses, and good corporate citizens. I think we've been very lucky to get good corporate citizens. If your kids are in school and you've ever had to knock on doors of businesses, we've been very fortunate, and I think a lot of that comes from the due diligence we do here. Not that we're looking at the history of the companies coming in. I think the one owner shop is a good fit for that location. As Mr. Obertino said, the beauty of that whole Deerberg site is there's 3 or 4 different ways to get in or out. So I think that's going to help the traffic flow. I think it's a self-policing thing. If I can't make a left to get onto Eager, I could certainly go straight, take another exit, go around to Deerberg's front of the store. So that's what I see is a good corporate citizen and a successful business. Because arguably, right now, we don't have a successful business there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Knowles. Yeah, Ms.
Hi.
Hanson.
My understanding was that it wasn't necessarily this exact restaurant that was performing poorly, but just a corporate decision nationwide. Can anybody speak to that? The existing restaurant, the Italian restaurant, and I keep wanting to say Macaroni Grill. Thank you. I always get that and Maggiano's confused. So my understanding is that the existing Macaroni Grill is not the issue. It's just a corporate strategy nationally, correct?
I think, I don't know the answer to that specifically. I know that they have closed down one other location for sure in the St. Louis market. But I don't know the data on which of their restaurants are performing well. I think that if we look at the traffic study that was prepared and the data on the number of cars that were coming in during peak periods, it would suggest that they are not doing well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would just like to say I agree with Mr. Dimmitt, and I think there are 2 major reasons. First, it's a character issue. I like the idea of the Eager corridor. When I think of, I guess, a more comprehensive plan or a comprehensive look for Brentwood, I like the way the Bonefish Grill is going, and I would like to continue that. We've got My Lee on that, kind of hidden, but in that area. And I think I agree with Mr. Dimmitt that it could create a slippery slope. Now, that's not to say that Chick-fil-A isn't a wonderful restaurant. They'd be great in Brentwood. I can think of a million other places in Brentwood if they were really excited about being in Brentwood that they could go without reaching the second issue, which maybe isn't an issue so much of safety as it is inconvenience. I think about the Brentwood Promenade. I think about the nightmare that is in terms of frustration and inconvenience and getting around. I think about the Whole Foods. I think about the Starbucks. And I understand that in terms of safety, I think he talked about speed. We're hitting 12 miles an hour, so nobody's going to die. It's just going to be fender benders. But I think about just the irritation level of one more plaza in Brentwood having just the nightmare parking situation and the jockeying for stop and go. And for those 2 reasons, I would love to have Chick-fil-A in Brentwood. I just don't think that that's the right spot for it.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. Ms. Bilderbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually was on the commission 20 years ago. Oh, my God. It all first started with the European Village that was going to be at the corner, and it was described as something that was akin to Westport Plaza, which is what we had looked at, and we were going to have a hotel, which we finally have. It only took us about 20 years to get the hotel. I think we were going to have more than one, as I recall, and it was going to be mixed use, and we were going to have a movie theater, and we didn't get the movie theater, alas. That quickly changed. It was all put out for RFP, and then it was broken down. When we did the promenade, it ended up, the plan was the European Village, and then it changed. The developer at the time said they took it to the marketplace, and the marketplace didn't like it. And keep in mind that at that point, the only development that we had done really in Brentwood was Home Depot, which was the first one that was kind of a big one that we cut our teeth on as a commission. And we made probably a lot of mistakes on that one, I think, in retrospect, looking back from what's subsequently come up. But it's been great for the community at the same time. So we learn with each development as we go along. So that was what we had before, we went through this big process, and it was a huge vision of the city and the former mayor, and then I think at the time our current mayor was on the Board of Aldermen, correct? Yes. So he had been on there at that time as well. So then obviously he continued forward with that when our former mayor left, and however that happened. But so it was a huge vision, and we've been really blessed with what's happened in that area as far as the improvement to the community, the revitalization. And at the time, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but there was discussion that 170 was going to come through Brentwood and be extended south. It was like the southern I-70 or 170 extension. And by putting this out for bid and having the promenade right there, obviously that made it prohibitive from a cost basis for them to do that. So all of that land was preserved. If that wouldn't have happened, then none of the other developments, the villas wouldn't have happened, the promenade wouldn't have happened, the Meridian wouldn't have happened. I mean, none of it would have happened. So it was a huge vision. Did it include in the vision fast food restaurants? No. I mean, not one. At the same time, just when we had the European village concept, and then at that time it was taken out to the marketplace, the things kind of changed. You know, we had an economic downturn in the middle of all of this too, you know, in 2008 that lasted for some years, particularly with commercial and retail development. So things do change. I don't think that the vision for that area really has ever changed. It's shifted. I think with what we ended up with the promenade is, you know, utilizing some big box retail development. It doesn't look big boxy, really. I think that we did even better when we got to Brentwood Square. So we've gotten better and better each time as we've gone through this. And obviously the Meridian is just stellar. So, you know, going into this meeting, I've spent a lot of time looking at this, a lot of time considering it, and I can see both sides of the issue. I've looked at some of Chick-fil-A's buildings, and I think that they look attractive. They don't look quite as fast food-esque, if you will. You know, honestly, I've never even eaten there before. So, you know, I can't say anything about how they run their business, but I know that they're respected in the general community and I think in the business community, and obviously very popular with a lot of folks. You know, the traffic issue concerns me. That's one of the things that we've experienced over time with these developments. We made some mistake with the promenade, with the compact car spaces and certain spaces not being utilized and certain areas being overutilized. In the Brentwood Square, the way it ended up, the parking spaces are really tight. And it's hard to make the turns into the spaces, particularly as cars have increasingly gotten larger as well. So, you know, there's been some, I even had somebody run into me in the Whole Foods parking lot before, not me personally and physically, but my car. They nicely left a note. But so I think that those things happen. Starbucks was an example where I actually don't think we had a traffic engineer on that. Mr. Cannon was not involved with that. And I think in retrospect, you know, we should have had a traffic engineer on that. Because clearly from a traffic standpoint, it's a nightmare. I love Starbucks, but I don't even go there anymore because their parking lot is so crazy. Like, even if I can get in, I just don't want to deal with that because somebody's going to hit my car because it's, like, dangerous.
Park at the cleaners.
Yeah, park at the cleaners. They really like that.
In the street.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, so these things have all been a great benefit for the community, and it's a hard balance to strike. I mean, you know, would we be able to get something that was more consistent with the Bonefish Grill, Miley, the Meridian, you know, the original, trying to keep more to the original vision of what we had for that area. You know, if we could do that, that would be great. Can we do it? I don't know. And then we have this business who's willing to work with us. I am concerned, though, that I know at the site plan meeting, when we talked about the 5 spaces, I said that I was feeling a lot better about it. I don't feel as good about it, you know, with that parking space difference. If you had gone all the way with the 5 spaces and not just the 3 spaces, I think my feeling on this would be a lot more clear. And to be honest, until I go to take my vote tonight, I don't know how I'm going to vote. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nuremberger?
Justin, a question for you. They're asking for a 12% increase on site coverage. What do you think they're doing outside of what they're now? What are they doing to improve the site above and beyond for giving them the 12% increase?
So the existing site and the proposed site are roughly equivalent on the site coverage. The existing Macaroni Grill has.
It says 65 to 77.
The existing Macaroni Grill has the site coverage bonus as well.
Okay.
And so what Chick-fil-A has done, what they have proposed, is they are keeping as much of the existing landscaping, particularly along the perimeter of the site, as they are able to, and then they are adding to that as well. So you'll notice, particularly along the frontage of Eager Road and along kind of between where they're adding the new pedestrian sidewalk in and the primary drive entrance into the development, they've added additional landscaping in that area as well. Another area where they added additional landscaping at the request, I believe it came from one of the subcommittee meetings, was they've added additional landscaping in the area between the parking lot and the drive aisle. They've added a bunch of plantings in there. I believe that they said at the last site plan meeting, they don't traditionally put plantings in there, particularly when you move to more northern climates. They have problems with snow removal. But at the request of the commission, they've looked at it and they think that they can make that vegetation work at that location in our climate.
So do you really feel like they've met that standard with this improvement that they're
I believe
asking?
that it is that their landscaping that they are proposing, without question, goes above and beyond our minimum code requirements.
It's really just maintaining most of it.
No, they're adding a significant amount. They're maintaining what's there and then adding a fairly significant amount as well.
Well, okay, so that answers my question. The one thing, they're needing the conditional use permit to for the drive-through. They could open a restaurant as is, correct?
Correct. Well, they'd still have to go through the site plan review process.
Yeah.
But it is the
it would be a lot easier process for to go through. They wouldn't have to have it CUP.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. The one thing I can say that to me, the Macaroni Grill is an architecturally attractive building, and I really don't feel like the Chick-fil-A is going to be as attractive. It's not going to be a bad location. I just think it's not as attractive as I think we could do better. So that's all I got, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Neuenberger. Mr. Klosky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I wasn't on planning and zoning 20 years ago, but I was on the Board of Aldermen when this development first came through. And I don't know if anybody recalls that on that site there used to be a cement plant. The concept of a fast food restaurant in that location was not presented to the board, but I certainly would have approved it at the time. And the whole discussion about the grandiose plans for that area. There is a Subway shop next to the Deerbergs, and a number of other businesses that aren't what you would consider to be maybe Ladue quality. So I support this application. I think it will be not only a benefit to the citizens who like to eat Chick-fil-A and travelers along Highway 64 who get off and purchase a chicken sandwich, but also I think it'll improve the traffic and the customers to the rest of the development, Deerbergs, and to the east, Best Buy, Sports Authority. And as far as the traffic is concerned, I work out in Chesterfield, and the Chick-fil-A out there is just, it is a nightmare. And when I go there for lunch, if I see that it's gridlocked, I just drive down to Wendy's. So
here you can go.
It's the old, we've talked about this before with the stacking lanes for drive-throughs and whatnot. If somebody pulls up and the lane is full, they just keep going. So it's going to be congested, but that's the nature of Brentwood. And if you don't like traffic, then you should probably move someplace that doesn't have as many amenities as we do. Thank you.
Okay. Any other, Mr. Dimmitt?
I know I'm not going to, we beat this one, but I just had a couple of quick follow-ups to a couple of things that are said. As far as Jennifer, her question about Macaroni Grill, yeah, there was a business model decision across the board to close a number of stores. It's not specific to this location. And in fact, there was one closed in Jefferson City and there was one closed in Omaha. And in both of those, they had in place a Chick-fil-A to come in and take over or renegotiate their lease. So I don't want there to be any misunderstanding or some thought that this is a bad location, that that's the reason Macaroni Grill failed. I don't know why it failed. I wasn't working there. My guess is that it's more their model. Something's wrong with Macaroni Grill, and they decided to close it. But you know, for all the years that I've been on this commission, I have been told that the northern part of Brentwood is the center of the universe as far as St. Louis County is concerned. And people want to come here. Customers want to come here. Businesses want to come here. I have a very hard time believing that if Macaroni Grill, when it does go dark, that it's going to remain dark for any appreciable period of time. I think the owner of that property is in a seller's market. And I don't know what effort, if any, Deerbergs took to try and find somebody else other than Chick-fil-A, or if Macaroni Grill simply came to them and said, look, we're shutting this down, but we've got Chick-fil-A ready to come in place, and Deerberg said, great. And I'd have no problem with that. Secondly, I have absolutely nothing against Chick-fil-A. I want to make sure people understand that I think Sherry and I might be the only two people in Missouri that have never frequented or patronized a Chick-fil-A. I've only heard wonderful things about the company. And I would love, like Jennifer said, I would love to have Chick-fil-A in Brentwood. That's not the issue. The issue is the location. And it seems to me that in order to accommodate your parking requirements, the trade-off is that we have to either create or permit a traffic issue. And that's my underlying problems here, is that's the very first factor on the CUP. The CUP doesn't look at the parking, it looks at traffic congestion. And if I'm weighing those two, parking and traffic congestion, and the applicant has said parking's more important to us than the issue of traffic congestion, then that causes me to lean more to recommending to the Board of Aldermen that they deny this application. I'm like, Sherry, I don't know where I'm going to go on this thing until they call my name. And finally, as far as closing, I applaud Chick-fil-A that they haven't had to close any of their locations, short of, or the only time being when it's a right-of-way issue. Something tells me that Starbucks 5 years ago could have stood up at that same podium and told me the exact same thing. And we know what happened to Starbucks 3 or 4 years ago. They had to close a number of their locations. So I appreciate that. I love the fact that you guys are successful, and I want nothing but great things for you. But I'm a very conservative person in general, and my concern is I look at worst case scenario.
Mr. Albertino?
I got one quick question for the applicant. And because it seems like there's some teetering going on, will you give up the 2 parking spaces if that's going to affect making this pass or not? Because from what I'm hearing, there's a couple of people up here that may vote in a different direction if those 2 parking spaces stay. So is this thing going to be all about those 2 parking spaces? Something to consider.
You prepared to address that, Mr. Hill?
I mean, obviously, we prefer not to lose the parking.
Well, Chief, if you don't mind, go ahead and step forward, please.
I mean, obviously, we would prefer not to lose those parking spaces as they are immediately in front of our front door. And I think the traffic recommendations were an option. Option 1, option 2. Option 2 said you could consider eliminating those 4 spaces, which tells me that it will operate safely and effectively without the elimination of those 4 spaces. So the other thing is, we have a landlord to consider here as well. And he just stated several minutes ago that they would not be in support of eliminating any more than the 3 spaces because of the parking demand, in their center. So if it was yes or no based on 2 spaces, I mean, obviously the right business decision is to give up the 2 spaces, but we obviously prefer to have those spaces available to us. And the other thing I'll mention is, the parking demand that we have is not outrageous. As a matter of fact, it's almost right in line with what the city ordinance requires. And eliminating these spaces just drops us below that. So I think we've struck a great balance of providing enough parking that we feel comfortable about our operation and our impact on the surrounding parking lots, as well as creating a traffic situation that we feel will be safe and effective. Otherwise, I mean, it affects us too. If traffic gets gnarled on our site, it affects our operation. And you can talk to the operator at Chesterfield. Things have improved there quite a bit since we made several improvements to extend the stacking lane and provide a multi-order point there, which is exactly what we have here. As a matter of fact, here we've got a lot more stacking within the drive-through, and then even beyond that in our parking lot. So we don't expect to create a situation on our site that gnarls the traffic and creates an operational ineffectiveness for us.
Okay, thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Sure, Mayor.
Since we're bringing up history, and I do think that that's important to understand where we've come from and where we are today. I can tell you that today it's easy to sit back and say, what was our vision? I can tell you we winged it a lot. We put out an RFP originally for everything from Hanley Road to Brentwood Boulevard. The entire corridor was one RFP, and we ended up with, in our vision, we ended up with the promenade. We hear from the public, and we talk about the mistakes that we've made over the years, and we always use the promenade as an example. And are the spaces small? Yes. And do people complain about the traffic? Yes. But you know what? It was designed that way. The drive lanes of the promenade were designed to be narrow. Why did they design them that way? To slow traffic down. They're also designed with curves in them. The reason the buildings are set back and have different lengths of the street is to have curves in the roadway so that the traffic drives through there slowly, because they didn't want it to be a cut through into Hanley Industrial Court. So people today complain about it. Yeah, they do, but as Yogi Berra says, it's so crowded nobody goes there anymore. And so we are successful, and we need to strive to have those good businesses. I think that the vision that Brentwood had is to have a good, balanced business base. And right now we only have 2 drive-through well, I take that back. We only have 2 drive-up restaurants or drive-through windows in that general location. Has Chick-fil-A looked at other sites in the city of Brentwood? Absolutely. They drew a site plan to build an out parcel on the Home Depot lot about 1.5 years or 2 years ago towards the side opposite McDonald's. Would it have met our code? Yes. They got to the point of talking to their other tenants, which had options to opt out any new businesses in there if they felt it would be detrimental to their business because they didn't want the competition. So McDonald's said no to the Chick-fil-A as an out parcel up on the Home Depot lot. Have they looked at other places along Brentwood Boulevard? And I guess my statement is, if there are other places in Brentwood, I'd like to know where they are, except for maybe in the middle of Hanley Industrial Court. We would not want any fast food restaurant along Brentwood Boulevard or Manchester backing up to residential neighborhoods. We've learned that lesson. Burger King with their drive-up window at night, people that have had their yards back up to it. There isn't really another good location for a fast food restaurant in the city of Brentwood. Raising Cane did look within the last year, actually to the point of having site plans drawn and meeting with myself and Justin for the bowling alley site. When they had their corporate executives come in and look at the site before they submit anything to the city, they said no, there wasn't enough traffic along that corridor. Again, I think it's important. I think one of the things that has made our business district successful, why businesses want to be here, is the fact that we do have a mix of businesses. If I'm going to put on my economic development hat and look at that site of Macaroni Grill, is the corporation as a whole having problems? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. They closed the one in Creve Coeur over a year ago, and it's still sitting vacant. This is not a good site for a single standalone fast food restaurant. It's in the middle of 2 blocks. You have to know it's there and want to go there to get there. And it's not the kind of, the businesses around it don't support it like the hotel does for Bonefish. If you look at the national chains, almost all the all the national chain restaurants are already represented in our market area. We had a chain that was at the Galleria, not open for even 2 years, open for 18 months, and it closed, even with that commanding audience that they had over there at the Galleria. So businesses come and go all the time. And as a PNZ and as a city, we evaluate those applications when they come before us. And so this isn't going to tie us to having, we've changed our codes a few years ago so that the conditional use didn't go with the property. Each application has to come in and reapply again. And, so again, I think that, this is a good thing for the Brentwood community. I think it adds another good type of business to our business base, especially along that corridor, for people to be able to use a drive-up window and still get their lunch and so forth. And I just, would ask for your support on this application. I'll leave you with one more thing that probably most of you probably heard me say this before. But I grew up in the catering business, and my dad used to say, if the only complaint you get is the plate's not big enough, that's a good thing. Well, if you don't have enough parking spaces, sometimes that's a good thing. And I think I also want to stress that I think the bar was moved on our application in this or an applicant on this application, because and I will ask Lee to correct me if I'm wrong, but I said this before. When they were first talking about these parking spaces, it was because of the turning radius to get into that parking lane. And that's why they started talking about eliminating the parking spaces so that they could maneuver more there. In order to create a larger radius to drive into the out parcel, Chick-fil-A went up beyond that and actually shifted the building to make that radius larger. And so now they did what they were asked, the spirit of the traffic engineer's recommendation. And now we're changing the bar by saying, well, now you did that, but we also want you to eliminate 5 parking spaces. Again, I think it will be sending a loud message to the development community if we turn down an application like this in the city of Brentwood. One more comment with respect to that site. Jerry Ebess, who heads up Deerberg's leasing operation, has for a long time, told me that they started shopping this site around over 2 years ago. They have not had one serious inquiry about putting another restaurant on that site. And that's a quote from Jerry Ebess, and you can ask him. So it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, it's a good place, but I think the reality of it is we need to look at and evaluate the applications that are before us. And again, I truly believe this would be good for the community. I think the community wants to have this restaurant there, and it'll be an asset to the city of Brentwood for a long time. Thank you.
Mr. Plufka.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obertino crystallized my thoughts exactly a few minutes ago. For me, it does come down, I think, hearing all the comments and hearing the mayor talk a couple of times now, it does come down to something as little as 2 parking spaces. And I'll explain really quickly, or as quickly as I can. First of all, the 2 developments we've talked about today, the Promenade and Brentwood Square, are known for one thing, and that is parking congestion. And I don't care. I live in Brentwood. I love Brentwood, and I love both of those places. But you cannot, with a straight face, tell me that there's not a congestion problem in both of those places. We are at full capacity a lot of times. It is impossible, if not otherwise difficult, to find a spot at Whole Foods at various times of the day and night. At Christmas time, forget about it. The same is true of the Promenade. And I think we should not be chastised for trying to hold a new tenant in a third development, which is going to increase volume, that we hold them to the simple recommendations made by our city engineer. And I would quibble with anybody, I'll quarrel with anybody who wants to say that the spirit of those changes was met. I don't think it was. It is not just simply a turning radius, Mr. Mayor. It is the fact that those other 2 spaces that are not being taken out in this application will impact folks getting out of this parking lot. Mr. Cannon spoke eloquently to the fact that his concern was the traffic coming into the place and on the public roads. His primary concern in his making his recommendations was not the traffic that may back up in the parking lot. And I guarantee you, because they don't want to lose those 2 spots that are the farthest south on the left-hand side, because they're the ones that are going to be parked 99% of the time when anybody is patronizing this restaurant and walking into the building. And they will absolutely every single time have to wait for either a car to queue past them or for a courtesy break in that line of people getting out, especially at peak times. The thought about increasing the throat to the in and out egress was to try to provide an egress line that would not impact cars being parked directly into that lot. That was the logic of it. It was not just a turning radius issue. And I will tell you that, you know, I see both sides of this. I really do. I mean, I made the comments I made with regard to public parking. I don't share the same concerns with regard to Mr. Dimmitt, with all respect to his comments. I think they were well spoken. I just don't know that I necessarily agree with them. I think Chick-fil-A is a fine business. I have patronized Chick-fil-A. I love their food. I think it would be great here. I also think it's problematic, and I am very nervous about the idea that this is going to be a far more congested spot than we ever anticipated with the introduction of this applicant. All that being said, my approval of this, to some extent, maybe it sounds petty, it hangs in the balance of their willingness to at least do what Mr. Cannon recommended at the subcommittee review. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, but didn't you hear Mr. Cannon here?
I did.
He's satisfied with the application as it is.
But he also said, and maybe he'll correct me if I'm wrong about this, he said his primary concern in making that recommendation was traffic in to the parking lot and traffic in the public spaces. His primary concern was not the internal congestion of the lot. And that's what I'm speaking to. I think that not leaving those 2 spaces to be able to be parked, I think is going to be problematic for traffic in their lot getting out.
Okay, and I did want to clarify that. Mr. Cannon, did you exclude consideration of congestion within the lot from your report?
I mean, you know, I didn't necessarily directly address it. I didn't necessarily leave it out. I feel as if this is a situation where I was asked to give some opinions. And the mayor did speak correctly in the fact that the number one concern was the ability for that southbound car to turn right, make a U, and get in, and not have conflicts immediately facing them, number one, with the outbound car right there in their face. Right. Now, the second part of that would be those parking stalls would be the next thing to consider in addressing those. And when I say those, I mean any. So what I did with option 2 is I laid out the minimum amount of improvements, which was only the turning radius issue, to move the driveway throat over. And I don't think on number 2, no stalls were eliminated. But then on option 1, I said, well, if we took 2 on either side, which became 5, because there's one that wasn't there before. So anything between 1 and 2 meets the spirit of my recommendation. It addressed the number one concern. 1 is better than 2, but 2's not necessarily unsafe. It's less safe. 1 might not be perfect. I don't have a right answer for you all. I appreciate the spirited debate. So if they improve the site plan by removing the stalls for conflict, they just removed stalls that they can't park in. So to me, it's what is the proper compromise? So we all got together and you heard my 2 levels of recommendation. They went back and worked together. That's what they're comfortable with. And if you're not comfortable with it, you'll make one decision. If you are comfortable with it, you make another. If they want to change their plan, then you make a different or similar decision. It's all I can do as your engineer is give you my opinions based on my experience and my technical capabilities.
But you are comfortable with the site plan as submitted?
I am.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anyone else on the commission?
Can I just make one quick point about those 2 spaces? Just consider, though, in the peak hour at lunch, those 2 spaces will be parked in the whole hour. So there'll only be 1 maneuvering, maybe 2, that happens when the maximum amount of cars are there. Just a point and something to think about, that's only going to happen 1 time or 2 times, that a courtesy gap has to occur to let that person out. It's not going to be every 15 minutes, because most people are going in, sitting down to eat. Some run in, some don't. But considering they're going in to eat, it's going to take, half hour, 45 minutes in the peak hour to eat.
Really? Okay. Half an hour.
It takes me about 45 minutes to get Chick-fil-A, have my lunch, and leave, so.
Okay.
Mr. Klasky?
Yeah, well, I would move that we approve the petition as submitted.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Me.
Ms. Bilderback?
Regardless of what anybody's going to vote on the motion, is there any conditions that need to be added that are not on the plan itself? Like this lease stuff and other things that are in here that we've talked about. Is everything that we've talked about written on this plan?
Yes, the lease agreement itself becomes a condition of approval through the Board of Aldermen's approval under the city's code. So if the commission were to move forward with that, the same information that's provided in your packet here with the lease information would be provided to the Board of Aldermen in their consideration for the joint parking as well.
So does the motion maker need to have that as part of their motion?
It wouldn't hurt.
Is there anything else besides that needs to be included? You understand what I'm saying?
Not that staff has identified.
Okay, thank you.
I will amend my motion to include the requirement that there be a cross-parking easement or agreement.
Agreeable to the second?
I'll still second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Nurnberger?
I just want to say, I really believe this is a decline in quality of what's presently on the site. I don't think the site coverage I don't think they really come forward with a plan that really addresses that, to give them that much site coverage. And I just think that I think we just need to have a higher standard going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Bertino?
One thing on the site coverage you keep just mentioning, per the code, they don't have to do any more landscaping than the previous applicant that we already approved the site coverage. They're putting more landscaping and going above and beyond a previously approved site plan that this board has already approved.
But they're
So it kind of
also
goes back to
asking
this
for-
site, this
they're also
drive-through thing. Just because you approve one doesn't mean you approve them all. They are doing more landscaping than the previous applicant that's there today. So how can we say they don't meet the coverage when the last applicant that did meet it? So that's my 2 cents.
Roll call, please.
David Plefko?
Yes.
David Dimmitt?
No.
Jennifer Hansen?
No.
Dan Glowski?
Yes.
Sherry Bilderback?
Yes.
John Number is no. Terry knows.
Yes.
Rich Obertino?
Yes.
Clint Lewis?
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nurnberger. And thank you to Chick-fil-A and the representatives of Chick-fil-A. You've been very accommodating of most of our requests, most of the requests with most of the commission members throughout this process, and we look forward to having you in our community. Mr. Wise, next step for the petitioner?
Next step, there will be a public hearing scheduled before the Board of Aldermen in early January. and I'll touch base with you and get everything figured out.
Very good. And thank you to all commissioners for a good spirited debate and for your commitment to the city's well-being. All right, we still have 3 more items under old business. But hopefully most of these are relatively innocuous. First item is petition for approval of an amendment to Title IV, Chapter 410 of the Code pertaining to sign regulations. You'll recall we've spent several site plan committee meetings reviewing the sign code. We approved a sign code. I think that there were some questions at the last general meeting for which we wanted to ensure we had legal counsel here to address. So, Mr. Wise, can you generally present where we were at the last meeting and Mr. Slews?
Sure, and I'll give kind of an extended version on everything that's happened because several things have changed since we were before you guys previously. We came through the process. We spent, I believe, 3 or 4 months going through reviewing what was a comprehensive revision to the sign regulations with the overall goal of providing a content-neutral set of sign regulations for the city of Brentwood. And we do have our legal counsel here that basically brought this to the city and has worked with us through that process. We had come through the commission. The commission made an initial recommendation for approval to the Board of Aldermen. We got to the Board of Aldermen, and in the period between the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of Aldermen, in reviewing the document, we legal counsel recommended an additional change that got lost in translation. And it was different than the version that the Planning and Zoning Commission had voted on. So we brought that back to the commission. We were here at the last meeting. At that time, there were some questions that had come up, and it was basically agreed that the easiest thing to do would be to bring legal counsel back in to answer some of the questions. Since that time, the Board of Aldermen did approve the recodification of the code, which has been an ongoing effort for several years now. And so that's why you'll notice there's also sorts of changes in the sections and titles, and there are several code references that I would recommend that a condition of any consideration by the commission would include that all cross-references within the ordinance be updated to reflect the current numbering system. So you'll see references to section 19-1, and now that may be section 410-001. And to just make sure that we have all of those updated. So there were 3 other changes that were done with the recodification that came through the Planning and Zoning Commission, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't know when the commission reviewed that portion of the code, but when the previous director was here, they had brought through the code through the commission, and in section 410-070, which pertain to prohibited signs, they removed banners and projecting signs, as banners are permitted as temporary signs, and there is a section that under certain conditions actually does permit projecting signs, so removing that conflict. So I would recommend that those changes be made consistent in any recommendation that the commission would move forward with. And then the other condition in section 410-140 pertaining to billboards, the commission had previously recommended a section 1F, which states that no new billboard structure shall be erected in which 2 or more displays are stacked one above another. And so adding that section back in as well to stay consistent with what the commission had previously recommended 2 years ago or whenever that time was.
I think all that's accurate, and you'll see we have Mr. Ed Slews here, who is a sign law, I don't want to say specialist, someone who's well-versed in sign law, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. It's either Mr. Plufker or Mr. Dimmitt. The concern at the last meeting was with 19-4, subsection 5. And the question is Mr. Slews, does 19-4, subsection 5, I believe it allows every residential lot to have one ground sign of 6 square feet or less. It also allows every commercial lot to have one 16 square foot or less sign without application to the city. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it's your opinion that that is required by the existing state of the law?
Actually, it's probably easier. I'll come to
Sure,
this.
yeah, please.
Good evening. Yeah, the issue that came apparent was the City of St. Louis case in 2011, which is an Eighth Circuit opinion, and which took a somewhat dramatically more restrictive look on what cities can do to regulate signs. The kind of classic issue that cities have run into in the past, predating that, is the distinction between a political sign and a campaign sign, and by that I mean the, Steve for office versus, I hate whatever. And that's a distinction you can't make. So the other, when you took the Eighth Circuit case into consideration, what they essentially said is you can no longer look at a sign to determine whether it's something that's allowed or not, which is essentially a total blank on looking at content. It's more extreme than I think even the US Supreme Court has said, and so there is a little bit of wiggle room. We try to, where possible, respect that. I know one issue, I won't name specifics, I know there's a building sign on Brentwood on a taller building that is something of a, people aren't too keen on, and that's why one of the provisions in there talks about, false advertising signs, because the US Supreme Court has recognized that you don't have the same level of protection for false speech. So getting back to why this provision's here, the way the amended code is structured, it allows everyone to have one sign all year round, regardless of content. It's the size of the residential one is the standard size for a political sign. On commercial, it is a little larger. This is my kind of recommendation based on ones I've done at other cities. I'm not married to that size. The importance in having that is because it's to avoid the incidental discrimination of content. For instance, per state law, you have to allow people who have their house for sale or for rent or for exchange to have a sign. And so if they're allowed a sign because my house is for sale and I have to have a sign that says house for sale, but your next door neighbor can't have a sign because there's nothing in the code that says you can have a sign. Commercial is a little bit more of a grey area because I'm assuming that by application of our code, every commercial building is probably going to be entitled to some kind of sign. Period. And there's always the ability to swap out that sign. If Target wants to swap their sign out and put a political message on there, under the law, they probably can. Why they would want to, you'd have to hope they wouldn't. There's a little bit more wiggle room if you want to get rid of that. There is a risk that a court could say, well, Target, yes, they're allowed their Target sign and they're allowed the other essential signs are allowed, but they're not allowed to pull a political message up. So really you're prioritizing commercial over political. I can't here assess how great a risk it is. You always have the stopgap of being able to, if Target come in here and threaten to sue the city always has the ability to say, okay, put your sign up. So my concern was when that gets cut out and you approve the rest of the changes, you've kind of taken a step back from really where we were because now it's kind of solidifying some of these different treatment. The sign code you have right now is, and my understanding is it's not a particularly old sign code. It was done with quite a lot of consideration. Frankly, of the 4 codes I've done and sign codes I've done in the last few years, this was the least amount of work, in terms of because it was well thought out. I think Justin took this opportunity to add in there some provisions that would allow for some more planned, sign developments and your larger developments, which I think is a great idea because that allows you to put that in place. But I almost feel if you don't feel comfortable with adopting, particularly for residential properties, having everyone being allowed to have that one sign, then I prefer almost that we go back to where we were, tinker with it a little bit and make sure we bring in the practical things. But I think it's just dangerous to kind of pull one section out when the kind of whole review is based on that. So that's my, that's why.
Mr. Plofka?
Thank you. It was me that raised the question last time. So as I understand it, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals decision focused on lack of it, or the that there cannot be a distinction between campaign and political speech?
The Eighth Circuit one actually dealt with, I don't know if any of you are familiar, but there was, I think, a 400 square foot mural painted on the side of a building that faced, I think, Highway 44 and maybe another highway. And it was the end eminent domain abuse, and then it had the international no signal. So I guess they were really advocating for eminent domain abuse. But the issue that happened in that case was that the city's code had a very descriptive definition of a sign. It's, a sign is this, a sign's not that, and some of these things in that, it's not religious emblems, it's not civic banners, and so what the court said is, well, hang on, so I've got to look at the content to determine whether it's a sign. And because under the code as it was written, if that was a cross or some other kind of, other examples, then it would have been allowed. But because it was that particular slogan, they said, it's your definition of sign, and the city went away, and it's, to be honest, it's still kind of up in the air, really, what's going on in that case. The one with the political versus campaign is, it's Ledoux versus Galileo, which I think was 94, and that's where they said someone wanted to have an end the Iraq war sign in their window.
And is that a state court decision, or is that?
No, that's the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay, so that's a Supreme Court decision.
Correct.
Okay, so, and you mentioned a minute ago, you alluded to the notion that the sweeping decision in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals was somewhat more sweeping in the sense that it said if you have to look at the content, you're going too far. Mm-hmm. If you have to look to tell. But in the Supreme Court cases, aren't there distinctions still made between commercial speech, as a for instance, and political speech?
You're absolutely correct. But the kind of reality of the situation that we're faced with is that to get to the U.S. Supreme Court, we've got to go through the Eighth Circuit. And the Eighth Circuit and the U.S. Supreme Court had the chance to take up that St. Louis decision and say, okay, and even if they said, okay, we get what you're saying, we get that there's some specificity, but with sign code, there's the absolutist approach, which is what the Eighth Circuit took, and I think it may be the only circuit right now that has it. There may be another, and then another approach, which I can't remember the exact terminology used, but it's the one the Fourth Circuit has, which is essentially, come on, the fact that I have to look at something to determine what it is doesn't carry the day. It's once I make that, I should at least be able to glance at it and say, oh, that's,
what the type of speech it is.
Correct.
So in drafting the changes that you've drafted, you paid attention to the Eighth Circuit's more sweeping analysis than maybe the little more, I would say pragmatic, but maybe the little different analysis of the Supreme Court.
Correct, with a couple of exceptions. One, I have to believe, like for instance, again, using the example of a sign that's just a false advertising sign, or that has the, I have to believe if we go into the Eighth Circuit and say, okay, look, I understand what you said about you have to look at the content, but there are 4 or 5 U.S. Supreme Court cases. The one that sticks always to mind is Hudson, where it says there is no protection for forced commercial speech, and there are other cases that say non-commercial, commercial. So I think it's almost absent having a code that says anyone can have whatever they want, whenever they want, and say whatever they want. I can't give guarantees, and I know you're not asking me to, but so I try to build in a little bit more of a recognition for, okay, because it is a genuine issue. If you're looking for a building and it says it's here and it's not there, then
do you have any sense at all that there's a conflict enough in the different circuits that this is something that's likely to be taken up by our Supreme Court anytime soon?
I don't know. Again, we hoped that would be where we got to. The Eighth Circuit opinion was right on the back of a Fourth Circuit one, which was different.
So my only reason to bring that up is, as we are enacting changes to a code, we are trying to do this, and we're not doing this every year.
Correct.
In the instance or in the event that a later decision might provide us a little bit of leeway and a little bit of reasonable restriction and differentiation, we can certainly revisit the code at that point. But I just wanted to get your sense of whether you thought that was imminent or if that was something that was perhaps never going to happen or perhaps years down the road.
I'm not aware of anything down the pipeline. Okay. And this is just my speculation. I've always kind of wondered with the Eighth Circuit is, and the US Supreme Court not taking it was because what the Eighth Circuit really essentially did in that case is they said, your definition, you need to go back and reassess this case whether your code survives without the definition of sign. And in the interim, lots of things happened and it never really came back up. So I've always suspected that maybe the US Supreme Court was thinking, well, we'll have this issue and we'll be able to readdress it, and this case hasn't gone away. Courts are unpredictable. I mean, the perfect example right now is the red light and speed camera litigation. You know, they passed on that 6 times before they took the last 3 cases. You know, and that's the Missouri Supreme Court, and they take a lot more cases than the US Supreme Court as a proportion.
Percentage-wise, yeah.
Personally, as a lawyer who spends a decent amount of time looking at this stuff, I think it's time the US Supreme Court at least had a serious consideration, but for whatever reason,
they didn't.
But then that said, obviously, there's a lot going on right now about First Amendment and where that is, so it's certainly feasible. It's something that could come back up, but I'm not aware of that. You know, I'm not following or haven't heard of a case that's like, this could be the one that gets it kicked off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Sluice, just for the benefit, and we got 4 Esquires over here. Over here, for the benefit of the non-lawyers on the commission, you modeled your proposed sign code off of the Eighth Circuit decision, correct?
Yeah, that was the largest. I wouldn't say completely modeled, but that was the biggest driving factor, and that's what prompted. I've done this for Creve Coeur, or partly done this for Creve Coeur, Richmond Heights. I've been working on Town and Countries for I don't know how many years. They keep losing steam. So it's everyone started looking at it again in 2011. And actually, a couple of cities started looking at the after the district court decision, which was the complete opposite. And cities were like, "Great, you know, we can do more again." And that obviously that rug got pulled out from underneath them. But yeah, essentially, the Eighth Circuit is the guiding marker for this.
But you did that because the Eighth Circuit is the circuit that binds.
Yeah,
us.
You can't get to the US Supreme Court without going through them first.
Right.
Okay. Ms. Bilderback.
For the record, I understood what the Esquires understood from the gentleman at the podium.
I hardly understood what Mr. Plufka was saying.
Oh, thanks very much.
Mr. Glowski?
He is special.
Yeah, I am not in favor of the revision to section 410.040, section 5, at least as it pertains to signs in commercial districts. If we approve this, that means that every single business in Brentwood can put up a 4x4 sign without regulation. That's just crazy. I am not going to vote for that. And if somebody wants to challenge that, I'm happy with that. I can understand that someone wants to put up a 2 foot by 2 foot square sign in their front yard protesting the war. But to me, granting commercial properties the right to put up a 4x4 sign without regulation essentially guts the entire code. And I can't believe that is what's required by the law.
Well, yeah, Mr. Sluice, I believe size is something we can work with.
Absolutely, and like I say, I have less concern because commercial signs due to commercial businesses, presumably, and Justin, correct me if you know of any commercial properties around here that wouldn't be allowed a sign. You know, I think there's a little more wiggle room there, and certainly size, manner, and place doesn't go away. To be perfectly honest, I'm not exactly sure where the 16 versus 6 came from. I know it's something. When Creve Coeur did theirs, there were a lot of meetings. There were a lot of different groups got involved, and the 16 I think originated there. So it's certainly possible that number is always just kind of carried through the different cities that have done this. But if it's something that if the commission, if that's the hang up, certainly smaller, and even if down to the extent of let's try and live without it, and if a specific issue comes up, we can address it. My concern was just the complete removal of this section out of the rest of the revised code, just because of the effect on residential.
Ms. Bilder, I'm sorry, Mr. Glosser.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't believe that we currently regulate the content of any sign. And I'm questioning the need for this change. We have regulations from a zoning perspective that regulate signs, but as far as I know, it does not concern the content.
We have certain signs. A perfect example is a directional sign. So a directional sign, by its definition, is defined by what's on the sign. So under the definition of what we consider to be a directional sign, we are having to look at what the sign says. Does that make sense?
Right, but getting back to Mr. Slew's example of Target, if somebody wants to put up a sign exercising their First Amendment rights, they can do that, but it still needs to meet the sign code.
Right.
Well,
and
under the existing, my understanding is under the existing code that the target sign, using that example, that's a permissible identification sign, and so that it can't be used for anything. It has to be used for the identification of its business. I don't think they could come before you under the existing code. And if I'm mistaken, please.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they could come before you under the existing code to say, well, we don't want to put the target bullseye. We want to put, end the war. I think right now, as our code is, they wouldn't be able to do that, and that's where you get into the issue. And it's, there are times you say, really, we have to worry about, well, your subdivisions get your directional signs and your identification signs. Does it really matter? And what I tried to do for the most part was just kind of blank out the signs almost and say, okay, how many signs right now does this type of business or development get? They get 4. Okay, they still get 4, and they still get the same 4 signs. But if they want to switch around what says what, that's up to them. And it gets really confusing in things like gas stations, because then you're trying to, write into the code what, when you try and take the content off of a gas station sign, you have to have the price signs and those. So that's why we, put the indicated uses in there. But I mean, like I say, the code you have right now is as good a code in terms of being as close to complying with where the law's got to that I've seen, but there are still, throughout lots of references to signs that have particular contents in particular.
So wouldn't a better solution be to maintain the current sign code, but just eliminate any reference or tie to the content of the sign, so that if Target wanted to put up a sign that said "Stop the War," they could do that? Instead of giving every business in the city the right to put up an additional 16 square foot sign.
And can I ask a kind of a question on that same lines? If the commission were inclined to remove the portion of this section that dealt with commercial properties or non-residential, and then we've got in the back we've got the message substitution clause, would that not handle this exact issue?
I think it would. And again, like I say, if you want to severely restrict or even remove that commercial, that wouldn't cause me anywhere near as much concern as the residential aspect. So, yeah, and as Justin mentioned, there is the one thing we've added here is a message substitution clause, which is the kind of catch-all of, well, if this sign would be allowed, there's ever a commercial sign that's allowed, you can swap it out for a non-commercial one as long as it otherwise complies. And so I think to both your points, that gets you where you need to get in terms of trying to remove the content-based issues without trying to have too many other inadvertent effects.
So under that scenario, that would mean the elimination of that section that Dan's talking about and relying upon the catch-all phrase at the end of the changes. No?
It would be right. It would be a revision to that section.
I'm sorry. The revision of that section. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Basically, yeah, you'd take out all references to commercial, so it would just be the one 6 foot in residential zoning districts that
Yeah, and I would be in favor of that.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I said, I'm not married to these. It's your job and your prerogative as commission to do what's best for
My concern is that the commercially zoned properties would use this as an opportunity to put up signs.
Additional signs.
Sure. But purely commercial messages, closeout sales, going out of business,
right.
50% off.
I think that's a very valid concern. Yeah.
All right, let's just make sure the motion includes that revision. Yes, Ms. Bilderbeck.
If we were to do that, I just want to make absolutely clear, what about the election season and the political signs? Would they still be able to put up signs for each total number of questions or candidates, the commercial properties?
That was the, yeah.
So even if you take a reference to commercial properties out of that section, they'll still be able to do that? Because otherwise, then you'd just be talking about residential property.
So you're referring to
looking
the
at it.
last sentence on
Yes.
19-4.
I'm looking at a potential unintended consequence of the language tweak.
So if we took out the commercially.
I think you would almost have to specify, instead, additional signs for residential and commercial or something like that are permitted, yada, yada, or whatever the word is, commercial.
Well, we want to
commercial
make sure
zone.
this gets done right. So, Mr.
Right.
Slews, would you rather take this and, you understand, I think the consensus is to remove the reference to commercial?
And I'm assuming as well you wouldn't want a proliferation necessarily of political signs in commercial districts as well
I
during
think that they should be able to have them. I think that's important.
at the usual election sign size.
Yes, yes.
What if you just reinstated? What if you
Yeah,
simply
I like your
reinstated the original
suggestion.
5 as it is?
Take it out.
Instead of
I'm
trying to
sorry.
What if you simply reinstated 5 as it is written before it was redacted, and eliminate 5 as proposed?
That doesn't get to the year-round
Right.
sign issue though.
Oh, it's just the
That
election
was the-
season issue.
yeah.
So if we kind of take those two concepts and blend them together and bring it back to you all,
Yeah.
how's that sound?
Is that satisfactory to the commission?
It does.
Yeah,
Okay.
and one other thing too, the size of the commercial that had been talked about in here that we're talking about removing, that's pretty common for campaign signs as far as size, just to let you know. In commercial and industrial zone property, that's a pretty common political campaign sign
The
size.
16 square, the
Yeah.
4 by. Well, I guess that's another important question then. If we're keeping campaign signs, political signs during election season in for commercial districts, what size would you want that to be? Would you want it to be the 16 or would you want it to be the 6? Or would you like, I guess we can come with the kind of both languages and you can discuss and pick one.
For the commercial properties?
I think it should be bigger based on the size of the property. Because if you commercial property always has the larger size signs. In residential property, the lots are really small, so they use the 6-foot square signs. But realistically, if you want your voice to be heard and you want to be seen, in a commercially zoned district, you have to have, and we're not talking about, it's not like all of a sudden necessarily on Deerberg's lot, because they were just here earlier today, that all the retail businesses are going to be sticking out something on Eager Road. It doesn't work that way. I mean, they don't have access to the rights to that property. So when you look at properties that have land, or Deerberg's itself, the owner of the land wanted to put a sign out, realistically, no one would see it if it was 6-foot square. So it's not like it's a huge proliferation. I don't think like we're going to have an explosion of political signs in the city. Nothing really was exactly, I don't know if it was limiting that before, but that's common.
All right, so
That's
she's
common.
saying the 16-foot would probably be, let's just do it that way, and we can always make a revision to that when we take it back up. So, Mr. Glasky?
Yeah, then one other request, election season definition is 60 days prior to any election until 2 weeks after. So if there's 2 elections per year, that's basically.
You're right, that'd be a long.
It's a long period of time. Would it be possible to maybe shorten that to 30 days prior and 2 days after the election? There's no reason to have signs up after the election.
That's tight. Like from a logistical standpoint, if you're staffing a campaign to get the signs down in 2 days, it's really hard. If a candidate loses, it's really hard for them to go out within the next 2 days and get the signs down. And 30 days is a little bit tight on the front end. Normally, they don't put them out, 60 days beforehand is pretty common.
Getting back to my concern, though, that the businesses will use this as an opportunity to put up temporary signage. They should be able to take their signs down after the election if they're advertising a clearance sale.
I could always give some thought, and I'd want to think about this, the legal aspects in terms of different regulations between zoning districts, which obviously, as a general concept, is permissible. But we could always perhaps a shorter election season in those commercial zones than the residential ones to try and, I guess, address both issues. If it's maybe it's a 30-day to 2 week or a 30-day to 1 week in commercial as opposed to the 60 to 2 week in residential.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let's do that. I concur with Mr. Glasky on that issue. All right, any other issues? So Mr. Slews can take any other concerns and redraft? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to table this matter.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Sluse.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, the next two items really should be quick. I've been on this agenda many, many times. Number 4 is petition for approval of an amendment to Title VI, Article 13, pertaining to mobile food vendors. Mr. Wise, can you review where we are on this matter?
Yes. We've been looking into it. We've been talking about this kind of on and off for a little bit. I believe the last formal update that I gave to the commission was that we were looking at the fees that were included into it. The previous ordinance that was approved by the board, there was an error on the ordinance that got passed along that the application was then based off of. So the application fee was incorrect on that. The application fee that is supposed to be on there is $25. So all of those refunds have now been issued. And that's the reason for the delay from staff's point, because we were tracing back, trying to find out and make sure that we had everything correct. So at this point, staff's recommendation, which I think is consistent with where I believe it was maybe, I don't know if it was the full commission or the subcommittee, that basically we just move forward with the ordinance and basically its current standpoint, remove the existing sunset clause and just continue to monitor and review it as we haven't seen any negative impacts.
So the thrust of this, and that was the subcommittee's recommendation, was that we haven't really allowed this program to have an opportunity to succeed in that, well, one, the fee was high, and two, the fee was not consistent with what was actually passed by the board. So the thought would be to actually allow the program to move forward with the fee at what it was intended to be and at a affordable rate. Discussion? Entertain a motion.
I move we recommend approval of the application, or the, whatever it is, trying to get the right wording here.
Amendment?
The amendment to Title 6, Article 13 of the Municipal Code of the City of Brentwood pertaining to mobile food vendors.
Second.
Further discussion? Roll call.
Clint Lewis,
Yes.
Rich Obertino,
Yes.
Terry Knowles.
Yes.
John Number is yes. Sherry Bilderback,
Yes.
Diane Glosky,
Yes.
Jennifer Hansen,
Yes.
David Dimmitt,
Yes.
David Plefka.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nurnberger. Next item is a petition to amend Chapter 25, Article 6, Division 8 of the code to adopt the new St. Louis County flood insurance rate maps. Mr. Wise?
So this is being brought back simply as, again, based off of the recodification that was recently passed. There are two sections. You'll notice the bill is an amended bill. So on the first two pages, you have the change in the effective date of the map to February 4th, 2015. On page, I guess that's actually page 2, I'm sorry. Page 3, you have the amendment to the map panels that are in there. And then on page 4, there were actually two sections in the recodification, they're shown in red, that were not included into the recodification. So I've shown those as an amendment to be added back in based off of the ordinance that FEMA has asked us to adopt. And so with that minor change, we've brought it back to the commission just again to get the final blessing. Again, all this does is updates to the new flood insurance rate maps and flood study for St. Louis County that become effective February 4th, 2015. And if you don't adopt them, if the city elects not to adopt them, come February, I think they give us a day, come February 6th, we would be removed from the National Flood Insurance Program.
I think that's the most telling. So, Mr. Wise, if the commission does not approve these new maps as they are presented here tonight, we lose our eligibility for flood insurance within
Correct.
those areas?
Correct.
Further discussion?
I have one quick question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wise, if we go ahead and recommend approval of this, it in no way results in any hardship, does it, on any property owners?
There will be, there are some minor changes in the floodplain delineation for several properties. I certainly wouldn't say that it's not going to be a hardship to anybody, and I wouldn't say that it's not going to be a benefit to anybody. But in the city of Brentwood, the changes are incredibly minor on where those lines are moving. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's not going to be a hardship.
Is the hardship that some properties that are not right now in a designated flood area might find itself in the flood area?
That is correct.
And would that then result in some type of a special premium that they have to pay?
Potentially.
Where they don't have to pay right now?
The vast majority of them, I believe that there are 28 properties that will technically be in the floodplain as a result of this, and there will be 30 that are no longer in the floodplain due to this. Now, what that generally means is someone who is not currently in the floodplain will have, the back corner of their property, a 3-foot strip that now is currently in the regulatory floodplain. That does not mean that they now have to have flood insurance. It means that if they want to build on that back little sliver of their property, that they would have to comply with the floodplain regulations.
But those property owners that are in the flood zone, if we don't do this, then they're looking at losing their insurance altogether.
They would lose their insurance, which would also have a drastic impact on their ability to get a mortgage, because for a federally backed mortgage in a flood zone, if you can't get flood insurance, you won't be able to. So it makes selling property incredibly difficult.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Entertain a motion? Yeah, Mr. Pulaski. Oh, would any member of the audience like to address the commission on this? Thank you, Mr. Pulaski.
Lee Charbonneau, 8833 Match. My only question is, where are the new lines from? Apparently it's a shift, and apparently a slight shift. I just wonder where, from our last flood experience, or from...
This is done through FEMA, so they have a bunch of engineers that have been for... this St. Louis County has been on hold while they've been discussing the process for 4 years, and so prior to that, there was a several-year process where they basically fly. I believe it's done using LiDAR, and they map the topography and the contours of the area, and then they model it all based off of that.
But the actual adoption of the mapping and seemingly the administration is something that has been delegated to municipalities.
That is the wonderful system of floodplain management, is that it rains down from above, correct. So because the federal government runs the flood insurance program.
So the administration needed to be in other hands, perhaps, so that there wouldn't be conflicts, maybe.
Well, or that it makes it easier for the federal government to do what they want to do.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Charbonneau. Any further discussion? Any other member of the audience like to address the commission? Entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of the petition to amend Chapter 25, Article 6 of Division 8 of the Brentwood Code of Ordinances.
Second.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
David Plefka?
Yes.
David Divit?
Yes.
Jennifer Hansen?
Yes.
Dan Klowski?
Yes.
Sherry Billebeck?
Yes.
John Number is yes. Terry Knowles?
Yes.
Rich Opatino?
Yes.
Clint Lewis?
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nurnberger. Any new business this evening?
No new business.
No alderman in the audience. City planner, do you have a report? Oh. Alderman Toohey, do you have a report?
Come on.
All right. Hey, Mr. Toohey, let the record reflect Mr. Toohey's been here since 7 o'clock, too. The record may or may not be accurate. Mr. City Planner, do you have a report?
I do have a quick report. I am currently working with the comprehensive plan consultants. We're trying to get something set up kind of early to mid-January. We're kind of looking to do something where we would have kind of a special, I don't know what the right term to use, meeting, workshop, discussion, whatever have you, whatever is the appropriate word, but just for the commission to give the consultants some initial feedback on what's going on, what are the things that are going great with the city as they go through their process to help them in that evaluation. So I believe right now we're looking at January 12th that week. But I will be sending out an email to all of you and getting that set up in the near future.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wise.
There was some comment about a website. Is there going to be a website
There is
associated
going to
with
be a
it?
website. We're working with the consultants right now to get that set up as quickly as possible. And essentially what it is it's kind of a two-phase website. They don't traditionally do them for projects this small. We've asked them to do it, so they have. But the first purpose, it would serve as kind of a central area where information on what's going on with the discussion, where the general public, hey, was there a meeting, was there a discussion, what was the recommendation? Those types of updates can be provided on the website. The other features of the website, we're still kind of working on figuring all of those out at this point. But there will be opportunities for basically people to use the website to give feedback in. They have some mapping features, which I don't know much about yet, so I don't want to. But yes, the website is in the works.
Yeah, I think that's great. Ms. Bilderback?
How is that going to work? Like, if we're considering a comprehensive plan, which under the state statute, the planning commission is charged with doing, like, how are we going to deal with public comment on the website? Are you going to compile this into a document? Like, I don't want to have to be responsible for going to this website every day to look at the...
You all will not be responsible. We will absolutely handle the administration of that. And basically that will be between staff and the consultants. We'll bring that and put it into a format for you all to consider. But
How much time is that going to take you, Mr. Weiss?
I'm not sure yet.
It sounds very time intensive. I mean, I have a concern about this, that it's
Yeah.
going to be very time intensive.
Right.
And that it may not get the public what they want.
Right.
Time intensive and money. Like, we're going to spend money to have an entirely separate website developed.
We are not spending money on the website.
Somebody's giving us a website for free.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
The consultant?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'm still concerned about the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Wise, please report to us if you feel there's
Absolutely.
timing issues on your end. Any further questions of Mr. Wise? Okay. Rationale, Mr. Wise, can you handle? You got 5 items to provide rationale on?
4 items, but yes. Sign code was tabled.
No. Thank you, Mr. Wise. Any other business? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, please adjourn.